You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that is honest, reveals the facts, truth, and statistics, and does not mess around. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Email me at TaylorGatorPhillips14@yahoo.com. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313, and go to our website at MichiganSportsTruth.com. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker is also available on iHeartRadio and SoundCloud. Also a subsidiary of Sports Radio Detroit, thus available on iTunes and Podbean. This podcast is particularly not for entertainment purposes, and the views expressed by the host of this podcast are opinion-based. However, they do not come without facts, research, statistics, and truth, whether other people like it or not, and no matter how harsh or complicated it may be. This is the Michigan Sports Truth, and nothing can ever stop it from being correct.
And welcome to episode 271 of the Week in Review. Whoever's vibrator is, please turn that off. Thank you. Frank Vajcner and Buck Geno on the call via Facebook Messenger. Frank Vajcner is also the co-host along with Jed on WXUT 88.3 FM in Toledo's After Further Review every Friday and Saturday morning. Fridays.
Occasion, it's actually myself and Derek Lawson who are hosts. Jed Schilling has been contributing on a somewhat regular basis, although he's been away because of other work commitments. So, So wanted to clear that up.
So it's Derek that's actually the lead host right now.
Yes, Derek has been the lead host. I've been with him since 2014.
I got the name wrong all this time. that's my apologies, but
and a quick note, I have to shout Jed Schilling out because he is actually
my apologies
the producer at Spiro Avenue now.
Yep.
So, good to see that he's on work with Spiro and his new venture, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Spiro brings to the table there.
Yep, that's true. Both Jed Schilling and I had been working on voiceovers for the intro to the Spiro Avenue podcast, and it didn't take long at all. But that being said, you can follow Frank Vajcner on Twitter at Frank_Vajcner, VAJCNER. Buck Geno also with us. Follow him on Twitter at BuckGeno3. That's Buck Geno, triple I in Roman numerals. How you both doing tonight?
Good, as long as it sounds like the fireworks have started early in my neck of the woods, so I apologize if any of that comes through, but we're doing well.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be too many fireworks going on where I live, because I live out in a couple of nearby houses just shooting them off. I don't think it's going to be anything too close or too crazy.
No, apparently not. I'm gonna watch the fireworks in the greatest fourth in the north, Lake City, Michigan. Lake City, Michigan, the home of my Lake City Trojans.
Yeah, I'll probably just be shooting a few off at a friend's house on the porch. He lives by a private lake near Temperance, Michigan, and we usually get a crap ton of fireworks, and I think it's going to be a 3-month show. But.
Yep. But we got plenty of topics to discuss, including the Tigers and the Red Wings and Pistons in terms of free agency, the Lions, and even a little bit of Michigan Wolverines football and basketball news. But let's start off with the Tigers, shall we?
That one is long gone.
Yep.
Well, after losing 9 straight, they beat the San Diego Padres, of course, a week ago in San Diego, and now they return home. They take 2 or 3 from Kansas City, and then they had Friday's 4-game series opener against the Cleveland Indians postponed until September 1st. The Cleveland Indians, by the way, are still leading the American League Comedy Central division, like you pointed out several times, Frank Vajcner. And then on Saturday, the Tigers and Indians split the doubleheader. Tigers winning the first one 7-4. Indians winning the second one game 2 4-1. Because the Tigers' offense really cooled off, and Jordan Zimmerman just could not finish that 6th inning. He's still a 5-pitcher guy, as many fans would point out. And then Sunday, just today, they lose 11-8. JV gets smoked. The Tigers looked like they were going to get routed. They were trailing by as badly as 11-1. Or 9-1, or at least 9-1. One of the previous times I saw it was 11-2, and they rally all the way back to 11-8, only to fall 3 runs short. They still lose. That just takes more. That just takes some more money away from Chris Ilitch's payroll piggy bank. You know what I mean? Trying to force him to sell the Tigers, but still, as I pointed out. As my real Spreaker co-host Ed Smith pointed out, it might take a year or two before the Tigers and Red Wings are sold, but it will actually happen. He's not really 100. It's not like he's 100% sure about it, but he's estimating it because he compares that to Bill Davidson's death when Mike Ilitch died. When Bill Davidson died, actually. And they're both dead too. But when Bill Davidson died, it took like 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years before Karen Davidson sold the Pistons to Tom Gorst. And now we're seeing the same. We're about to see the same case where when Mike Ilitch dies, Chris Ilitch and Kelly Ilitch are in financial debt with their own company, Ilitch Holdings Incorporated, being tied to team revenue for the Tigers and the Red Wings, and the tax issues is the main reason. But they've been trying to avoid the tax issues, plus their financial debt being tied to team revenue is another obstacle in selling the franchises. I read that more clearly, but it's still, considering they've been trying so hard for years to avoid financial estate tax issues prior to Jeff Moss's article back on March 8th of this year, 2017, they've been slowly but surely failing to avoid those estate tax issues. But back to the Tigers here. They remain in 4th place, as far as I'm concerned, in the American League Comedy Central Division. Last week it was 34 and 42, but now, as I count, 37 and 47.
It should be 37 and 47 after today.
Yep, 37-47 after today. Yep. Yeah, that's what I just counted. Thanks, Buck. Oh, check that. 36 and 45, the AL Central would say. But anyway, yeah, it's 36 and 45. But it was close. I just looked at the standings on the MLB.com @Bat mobile app. But the Tigers now stand in 5th place again in the AL Comedy Central. But they released Francisco Rodriguez and placed Alex Presley on the 7-day concussion disabled list. I think that was like a week ago when I reported that. Yeah. When I discussed that with Ed Smith. Thankfully K-Rod's gone, but still, it was it was actually too much of them to for the Tigers to have the same kind of bullpen issues. But Efrod was having the even worse issues than Joe Nathan back in 2014. But Miguel Cabrera, as I was seeing his check swings, I saw two check swings back on Friday and Saturday, and they both crossed the plate so well that neither of them were that close. And Miguel Cabrera just keeps at least staring at the umpire in disagreement, to say the least. And yet he doesn't get ejected because he just walks. He doesn't say too many words to him, and he's just walking away dejectedly. And he still continuously shows his frustration. But if you're gonna, like I pointed out on Twitter at DT2Phillips, my Twitter handle, if you're gonna swing, just swing away. And we're talking about a Triple Crown winner back in 2012, a Triple Crown winner back in 2012, and a back-to-back AL MVP winner 2012 and 2013. I guess that's gone down the drain the last couple of years, or probably just this year. In fact, Miguel Cabrera is aging, but he still puts up better numbers has put up better numbers than Victor Martinez has.
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah, Victor Martinez returned from his irregular heartbeat, was activated from the 10-day DL, and the Tigers on Wednesday night, just after that, they lose 8-2 to the Kansas City Royals. That would be the stench that this tanking process needs, and that the Tigers themselves don't want, if you compare the two.
Yeah, and kind of going back to today's loss, I just want to say that, anybody who thinks that, oh, well, they didn't quit, they showed up at the end, look, that game wasn't as close to the final result score just because they scored a bunch of garbage runs, because you had guys getting served a bunch of cheese by Cleveland pitchers. It doesn't change the fact they still lost the game. And also, this is actually the first time, I believe, in over 300 and some starts for Verlander, where he did not record a single strikeout. That itself to me is shocking, because Verlander, I've seen him have his bad days, but this day for him was just downright atrocious. Especially when he comes away with not a single strikeout in this one after he only lasts 3 1/3 innings, I believe it was.
Yes, it was. It was 3 1/3. And when you say about Verlander and not getting a strikeout, he hasn't been the nominated JV that we've seen in past years. And of course, he's aging like everybody else does. I think the real alarming fact, though, for his start today was the fact that not only was he not striking guys out, but he was getting hit with regularity. He gave up 9 hits in that 3 1/3, also 3 walks, and there was not a lot of at-bats for the Indians where they looked even remotely mismatched against him. He just came out and just did not have a good start from the get-go, and at this point for them, he's not really their ace. Michael Fulmer is the ace of the staff, and Justin Verlander right now is by default probably their second pitcher, but it's really disturbing to see him pitch that poorly against a team that he's faced probably more than any other in his career, or at least pretty close, in the Indians. And, those guys, they know what's coming, and it's one of those things where at this time, the Indians got the best of him, and he just didn't have a way to get anybody out. He didn't put anybody away. You talk about the no strikeouts. I mean, he's had a lot of outings this year where he just hasn't been able to put guys away when he's got 2 strikes on them. And I think that's really the most disturbing part of his start is he doesn't have that swing and miss pitch anymore that he can get guys out consistently with. He's just not pitching in that manner where he's getting guys out that with a consistent basis when he's up in the count.
And let me point out the exact date, which was when Justin Verlander previously did not record a strikeout. It was April 28th of 2007 when the Tigers got off to a very slow start, an AL championship hangover after they made the playoffs for the first time in 19 years, and they reached an American League championship for the first time since 1984. But that was a long time. It was 10 years. It was a 10-year streak. Justin Verlander has recorded at least 1 strikeout for every single game consecutively.
Yeah, I mean, given that there's been a lot of chatter floating around that this is possibly the last time he pitches as a Detroit Tiger at Comerica Park because it sounds like he could get traded at the deadline somewhere. I mean, is this something that possibly knocks off a lot of the shine?
Here's the real news, though. Justin Verlander was expected to hit the trade market in 1 week, and then we heard he's unlikely to get traded unless the team, the Tigers, retains their salary.
I mean, honestly, I think they'd be stupid not to trade him because you're just going to let him waste his career without a championship.
Yeah,
I've been saying for at least the last year or so, trade him to the Dodgers. I mean, him and his soon-to-be wife, Kate Upton, have a home in L.A. He can go to the National League. He can be on a team where he doesn't necessarily have to be the man because they already have Clayton Kershaw. I mean, that's probably his best chance to win a World Series. I mean, granted, a lot of Tigers fans aren't going to like it, and for me, is it going to suck seeing him go? Yeah, but, I want to see him get a ring. I mean, I hated the fact that he's done so much for this team and for the city, and he doesn't really have much to show for it.
Well, that's true. And when you talk about going to the Dodgers, I mean, they have Jose Urias, who was injured, leaving a little bit of a hole in that rotation. Plus the fact that LA Dodgers don't have any problem spending money. I mean, maybe you don't have to retain as much salary to get him over there. The Dodgers farm system, rich with prospects, and they have plenty of available prospects to offer to Tigers. I'm in agreement. I don't think that him pitching for the Tigers is going to make them get any better, not simply because of his performance, but just because of the team. And for him to go to the National League and play out the remainder of his contract, at least as far as he can go,
like Max Scherzer,
it makes sense for them. Yeah, I mean,
because Justin Verlander hasn't improved lately, by the way.
No, he's not good. I mean, he's getting older. And going to the Dodgers where he can be a bona fide, probably a 2 or 3 starter. He's obviously going to be behind Kershaw. I think that takes a little bit of the pressure off of him because on this team, save Michael Fulmer. I mean, he's the guy. And I know it's one of those things that a lot of people won't like, but at the same time, you have to look at, much like the Red Wings, the other team that's owned by the Ilitch family, you're getting to a stage now where you've got a lot of aging players that have been the so-called face of the franchise for so long. And at this point, their teams are not ready to compete. The Detroit Tigers, barring some miracle, will not be in the playoffs this year. And looking ahead to next year, it's going to be very difficult for them to field even the same roster that they have now. J.D. Martin is an unrestricted free agent. They have other guys that are going to be coming up with contracts, and they still have a lot of dead money sitting on the payroll. I would say for the Tigers, it's easier for them to trade a Justin Verlander and get something in return rather than have somebody like a Victor Martinez who is due some big money coming up in the next couple of years. For him to be traded, him being Verlander, and getting that off your books, it makes it a lot easier, and you get something in return. You're going to get nothing for the other two guys that are going to be coming off the books soon, Victor Martinez and Anibal Sanchez. So I'd say go ahead and do it if you can get a good package where you're getting some guys that are either ready or slightly behind being major league ready, and letting Verlander finish his career over there rather than having him struggle through this and being a good soldier. He's not going to ask for a trade. He knows how that would look. So he's never really going to say, hey, you need to trade me to a team so I can get a ring, because he's not that type of player. But it would almost be like you're doing him a favor at this point to trade him to a team that has a possibility of success. And the same could go for Miguel Cabrera. I mean, right now he's at probably one of the worst years of his career, if not the worst. And with him being paid until he's the age of 41, and a princely sum at that, you have to look at maybe getting rid of those guys simply because they're not going to be here when the team is ready to compete again. They're not going to be cornerstones of the franchise. And if you can find takers for them, even if it means eating a little bit of money here and there, at least you're getting something in return that you can use to build up your team. I mean, the future of this team right now is not Justin Verlander or Miguel Cabrera. And for them to move on from them and even possibly J.D. Martinez, I think that when you talk about where they're at and where they need to be, those are two very different spots. And for them to even think about making a run in the next 3 to 5 years, those two contracts have to come off the books, and they have to be allowed at least some flexibility, because when you look at the free agency classes in the next couple of years, there are plenty of players that if the Tigers were to have a solid base, they could reach out to some of those players and fill those holes that are left by Cabrera and Verlander. So I think that the time to trade them is now, rather than letting them getting so advanced in age and declining in ability that you're not able to get equal value. You're not going to get a dollar for dollar trade now, but if you wait to pull the trigger even longer, you're just costing yourself assets at that point. And I think that as painful as it would be to see them go as a fan, as a business person, you just have to make that move. At least one of them. I would say Verlander probably has the higher trade value just because of the fact that if he gets to the National League, he can pitch to lineups that are a lot less potent than he sees on a day-to-day basis. And it'll give him a chance to play for a contender. And I think that everybody at that point would say that even though it's not the best PR move, it's probably the best move for the team to move forward.
I have to agree with you. Fans keep thinking that this team revolves around Justin Verlander, Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, used to be Jim Leyland, now Brad Ausmus. I mean, come on. I mean, Brad Ausmus is right now is the Tigers manager. Right now, we wish he wasn't. But the fans use that as a reason that the Tigers are expected to win a World Series title. They're not.
Oh, absolutely not. They're not even close to what they were 3 or 4 years ago. And for them to continue to pay them the money that they are in their contracts and stifle what could be growth, or at least a chance to start rebuilding that core, I think not only is it a service to the fans, but also to those players, because those guys deserve to at least play for a team that is going to compete now rather than later.
You're absolutely right, Buck.
I mean, I wouldn't be, I'm not advocating that I'm not advocating that they just, give them away for nothing. But I mean, you've got to look at it from the long view now, that the next time that these guys are ready to compete for any type of title, whether it be a division title or an American League title, those two guys either are not going to be on the roster, or they're going to be supplementary pieces at best. And are you really willing to pay them almost $55 million to be there just so they can enjoy the ride? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I say you gotta let him go and get something for him. That way you can start your process of rebuilding, and then down the road you become a contender again.
I mean, it's a cyclical thing, and I think that's where a lot of the Tigers and Red Wings fans who have enjoyed the successes up to this point have gotten spoiled, and they continue to think that it's going to happen. It's not. You have to break it down. Now, there's differences in the baseball aspect as it is from the NHL, simply because there is no hard cap. So there's a little bit more maneuverability when it comes to the Tigers and the payroll. But at the same time, it's the same principle. You cannot let guys that are your franchise players dictate how you're going to operate when your goal is to win a World Series. And they are not going to be closer to a championship by leaving them on the roster and continuing on the path that they are. So that's why I always grade any of the teams that we talked about here is, are they closer to winning a championship than they were before? And right now, if they were to go through the trade deadline and trade guys like Alex Avila, J.D. Martinez, Miguel Cabrera, and or Justin Verlander, it would get them closer. Now, it would be a step backward, a small one, but it would be a small step back to take more steps forward with the new players and assets that you were able to acquire in that trade. And I don't see this team making a huge move forward in the standings or in their ability without getting rid of some guys. I mean, there's just a lot of dead space and dead weight on this roster right now. And the way to get started from moving out from under that is to give them to somebody else. Let them be somebody else's problem. I mean, we're still paying Prince Fielder, for Pete's sake. And
through 2013.
You look at, well, I mean, they retained part of his salary to make that Kinsler deal. And, there's another guy. I mean, he's injured right now with Ian Kinsler. He's going to be a unrestricted free agent as well. Now, the difference between Kinsler and Cabrera is the 10 and 5 rights. So Verlander and Cabrera can dictate to where they'd like to go if there were to be a trade offered. But I don't see Justin Verlander turning down a trade to the LA Dodgers. Like Frank mentioned, he's got a home out there. He'd be much more effective in the National League, I think. And I think overall it would make it easier for this team to move on. I think that's where the Red Wings really kind of got off base, because when Nick Lidstrom retired, that was really the time for them to start to move on. And when you lose really the last piece of that franchise that had been successful for so long in Nick Lidstrom, they could have made a move. I know that they had Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk, but they let them hang on for so long, and they were so ineffective as their careers wound down as far as making the team better. I mean, there is no doubt that they still have talent, but for them to stay on the roster, it was really, at that point, more to get people to come to the games. And I know there's a balance, and I'm sure that if Justin Verlander were traded, there'd be an uproar from the general fan base. But, that's sometimes, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And I think that Justin Verlander, at this point of his career, isn't doing the Tigers any type of service by going out there, getting bombed, and making a boatload of money to do so. So I think that for the Tigers, they have a better outlook if they were able to move him in some other parts and really start to rebuild this team from the ground up. The farm system is pretty much bare. There's a lot of guys that are not even close to being ready, and we don't know how they're going to develop. But you have to be able to fill that farm system back up, and the way to do it is to trade some of your assets that you have now to begin that process.
And let me point out that at some point earlier in the season, if the Tigers were to be below 500 in some way, somehow, at the end of June, then they would sell. And they're already still under 500. It's already past June. It's July 2nd now, as we're going live here on Spreaker, episode 271 of the Week in Review of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast. Taylor Phillips and Frank Vajcner and Buck Geno talking with our audience here and with each other. There, like you pointed out, there's a lot of dead weight, not performing enough. Verlander, Cabrera, Martinez still paying Prince Fielder in his trade for Ian Kinsler, who will soon become an unrestricted free agent. It's almost like dead weight all around. Kinsler's regressed this year, especially on offense. The last 2 or 3 games, he went like one or two for his last 12 or 13. He went 0 for 4 in at least one game in that Cleveland series.
Yeah, and he's 35 years old. I mean, he's not going to get better. That's just the law of averages. And that's one of the things that's the hardest part of sports is that with any team that you follow, I don't care who it is, I mean, there's going to be guys that you like, and they're going to be gone. I mean, even if the New England Patriots, who have been successful for roughly the same amount of time, they don't have the same roster every year. They continually are moving guys in and out to make themselves better. And sometimes that means getting rid of somebody that was productive or that was a big part of that team that was successful. But to make room for somebody else that can maybe do a better job or at least provide a cheaper alternative, that's the kind of stuff that has to happen. And, you look at even teams like that. I mean, Tom Brady's getting towards 40. He can't play forever. They're going to have somebody else play quarterback somehow. So the same principle applies to these teams right here in our home state. We love seeing those guys play. We love watching them when they were in their prime. But at this point, it doesn't make any sense to continue to pay them to be on your roster when what you really need is new blood to make the next step and start the next cycle of success.
And we're recommending the same thing to the Detroit Red Wings. And of course, Ken Holland would never do that. He keeps taking away roster spots, and we're going to touch on that as with a Trevor Daley signing real soon. Tigers play the San Francisco Giants, who are 33-51, dead last in the NL West, Tuesday through Thursday, starting on Independence Night at Comerica Park. Then they play those Indians again, the Indians, in Cleveland at Progressive Field. And that's a 3-game series.
That's the last one before the All-Star break. And actually, the series with the Giants starts on in the afternoon on the 4th of July.
Yep,
I believe
that's true.
Yep.
Independence Day. Yep.
Yeah, I believe it's the 1:10 start. I'm going to pull up that bat real quick. It would actually be Michael Fulmer takes the bump on Tuesday against Matt Cain. Wednesday, it's Daniel Norris against Latch. I don't know who that is. And then Anibal Sanchez would go Thursday at 110 against to be determined.
Yep. Michael Fulmer, by the way, has just in. He just made his first All-Star selection. I just got that from the MLB.com at-bat mobile app. It says right about here, Tigers right-handed pitcher Michael Fulmer follows up a stellar rookie campaign from last year, I may add, with his first All-Star selection. Boom. That confirms it. And he deserves it, too.
Oh, yeah. He does. Granted, I don't know if he'll get to pitch at all in the All-Star game, but I think that shows
everybody's got to have some face time. Playing time,
and I think, and also on the MLB at that app, it says the Tigers and a shortstop from Venezuela have struck a deal. They got a deal with shortstop Alvaro Gonzalez, who is the number 23 on MLBpipeline.com's top 30 international prospects.
Link it to us.
Alrighty, yeah, I'll share that to you guys momentarily.
We could definitely use a backup for Jose Iglesias, who is still on this roster right now, as of right now, I may add. But that's quite a signing right there. A 23-year-old Venezuelan shortstop, Alvaro Gonzalez, right?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, the Tigers not known for using their international slot money, and they go ahead and do that with Alvaro, which, again, he's probably not close to his major league days. At least what it does for them is it gives them another option down the road that look to him as the next cornerstone as far as the infield's concerned, if he's able to pan out. So I think for the Tigers, it just spells even more that they need to move forward with younger guys, and that's part of this whole conversation. I mean, they're 8 games below, or I'm sorry, they're in last place, and they're at 36 and 45, right? So they're 9 games below 500, and for them, the product retaining organized roster, to know that not only the competitive, and you have to look at it as if the time is ripe for them to go ahead and make moves. There are plenty of teams that want in offers. Yeah, and I think that they should spare really no expense in trying to find out the best deals for pretty much anybody on their roster. There's really not any untouchables to save Michael Fulmer that are on this roster currently. And if somebody's going to come to you with a deal, you have to entertain the thought. And you have to try to get the best return possible for some of those players.
Oh, definitely, yep. So, that's also speaking of free agency, the Toronto Blue Jays and the defending World Series champion Chicago Cubs, who have been having a bit of a rough season. Both those teams, the Jays and the Cubbies, have shown interest the past week in catcher Alex Avila.
Yeah, I think they can actually get a big return from the Cubs because they've got.
I would say the Cubs are probably the front runners for that, simply because they've released or waived or whatever you want to call it. They designated Miguel Montero for assignment, which means they're down a catcher. And the Cubs also a team with really good base prospects and guys that are probably ready to make that leap to the major leagues. Alex Avila has really done a nice job for the Tigers in his role this year. I really can't see them keeping him for the sake of competitiveness. when you can get something for him. And that catcher's market, he's the left-handed bat. He's a veteran. He knows the score. He's played in playoff games, and I think he'd be a great addition to somebody like the Cubs or the Blue Jays. And I think the Cubs probably are the front runners simply because they really need some depth at that catching position. So I think that for them, that would be their best effort to go and ask Chicago what they're able to give for Alex Avila. And again, start that rebuilding process by using what you have now.
Yeah, and you have to remember that last year in the playoffs, essentially platoon 3 catchers, depending on who was pitching. And because I think they had Montero, they had David Ross, and then another guy who would name escapes me right now. So you have to think if you throw Alex Avila into the fold, I mean, he probably might catch for some guys, and they'll use him against right-handed pitching because you look at his numbers, and he has excelled hitting the right-handed pitchers. So I definitely think you could get a decent return for him. But I think also, does JD Martinez get traded as well, because he's a pending unrestricted free agent, and I'm sure there'd be a team that was looking to add him to their roster as a bat or an outfielder. And I'm sure that he could probably match a nice bounty as well.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, there's no shortage of possibilities for them to trade and find trade partners. It's really just going to be who brings the most to the table. And I think that for the Tigers to not investigate those would be a deep dereliction of duty. So, yeah, it may mean a really long August and September, but at the same time, it's better than having a long 3 to 5 years just watching this core degrade like we have with the Detroit Red Wings. So I'm all for what basically is going to amount to a fire sale if it's going to make them better in the long run. Because to keep those players on the roster with no hope of re-signing or improving, depending on who you're talking about, it doesn't make any sense to leave them on the roster.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're just going to keep on wasting money. And they're going to keep wasting money anyway, even if they trade it away. They're still stuck with their contracts, like Prince Fielder's contract. And that's just and that Prince Fielder contract was on Dave Dombrowski and Mike Ilitch when he was alive.
Well, they were able to turn it into Ian Kinsler, which was something that they did need.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I mean, you're still paying, at the end of the day, you're paying somebody not to play for you. And it's never a good pill to swallow, but sometimes it is a necessary evil. And I think that for the Tigers, the margin was pretty slim the last couple of years when it came to free agency. And they just haven't really been able to put it together. Justin Wilson's really been the only addition, I think, that overall has panned out in favor for them, simply because that trade that they got him from the Yankees has worked out for them beautifully. But even he, I would look at it and even seeing what he's able to pull, because you don't need a guy to close games if you're not going to win very many. So I think that really just for the Tigers, they need to see what they have, and it could be a painful last couple months of the season. But at the same time, sometimes it's necessary. And I think with the long stretch of success that they've had, that's how sports rolls. You look at teams and they continue to try to defy the odds by moving guys around and keeping guys around and re-signing the contracts, when at some point you're just going to have to bite the bullet and really go into the tank, so to speak, no pun intended, and find out what you have and start to restock that farm system and get guys into the fold that are going to help your team down the road.
Those are very good points. Very good points. Very accurate points. So that's pretty much baseball talk. Covered everything. Also including that signing of the number 23 international prospect from Venezuela, shortstop Alvaro Gonzalez. Thanks to Frank on that one for pointing that one out first here on the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast Weekend Review, episode 271. He, myself, Taylor Phillips, and Buck Geno alongside with you guys, our audience. You can follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips, like the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page, and join its Facebook group. Also follow Frank Vajcner on Twitter at Frank_Vajcner, Vajcner. Follow Buck Geno on Twitter at BuckGeno III, triple I in Roman numerals for Buck Geno III. Speaking of the Red Wings, let's talk them for a little bit, huh?
Well, you look at the free agency market in the NHL, and there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, let's be honest. There wasn't a whole lot of guys that were jumping off the page at you. Kevin Shattenkirk was probably your number one free agent in terms of talent and availability. So he goes to the Rangers. There's a lot of defensemen that were given a lot of money. And I think that overall for the league, I think that there was a lot of contracts handed out that because of the way that the free agency class shaped up, there's a lot of teams that were desperate to add, but they weren't overly aggressive. And what I mean by that is when you look at some of the teams that were making the big signings, so to speak, the terms and the numbers really were very small as compared to other July 1st free agent frenzy, whatever you want to call it, in past years. And I think that that's a product of the fact that guys are trying to sign long-term deals before they hit free agency or try to get locked up and really get their positions tied in for long term. And with the NHL salary cap going up a little bit, but not that much, teams just didn't have a lot of room to add those big name free agents at the term and rate that we're used to seeing. When you're talking about the Red Wings, they do add a couple of players, NHL players at least on the roster. Trevor Daley was the biggest one for them, 3 years at $9.5 million. And we talked about this on our previous podcast on Talk Show. Trevor Daley, who it was pretty much assumed would be signing with the Red Wings, indeed did. And now the mystery becomes, where does that spot push somebody else out? Because they still have 7 defensemen on the roster. They haven't made any trades. They do have a couple of players left that they need to re-sign that are restricted free agents. And it'll be interesting to see now what those deals are going to look like. Not only because of the cap space, but because of the roster space. Because there's not much room on either one. And so with the Trevor Daley signing, which I thought, I didn't really like it from the age and the term standpoint, but at the same time, it leads me to believe that there's going to be some movement, because you don't sign a guy like Trevor Daley without having to move somebody else. Maybe it's Nick Cronwall going to IR. Maybe it's a trade.
One thing
we
that
just don't know what's going to happen.
That Nicholas Cronwall may be headed to the long-term injury reserve. That's what Prashant Iyer pointed out. He's the advanced analyst guru from Winging It in Motown. And by the way, Trevor Daley's deal is 3 years, $9.5 million roughly. And let me analyze Trevor Daley. 5 goals and 14 assists in the regular season, 1 goal and 4 assists in the playoffs. Last year, this past regular season and postseason with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are now back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. Offensively, not so good. Defensively, I'm not sure. We don't have any.
No, his stats don't really jump off the page at you. Yeah, because Daley's more of a stay-at-home defenseman. He's not someone he's not like somebody like a Brent Burns or an Alex Petrangelo who's gonna stuff the stat sheet. He's more of a stay-at-home guy and play smart and responsible. He's not a big gambler. He can chip, as you mentioned, he can chip in points here and there. But the
term, I wasn't real fond of because I said it should only be like a 2-year deal at most, and they give him 3. The annual average, I mean, it's not great, but at the same time, I'm glad they didn't give him over $4 million annual average. So I mean, it is what it is in this case. I know, because at least it wasn't like last year when they signed Franz Nielsen to a god awful contract, and I completely lost my shit there. But I think it's just it was a signing where they said, "Oh, we gotta address our blue line," and I do agree. I think this is it's probably going to mean Nicholas Cronwall goes to long-term injured reserve, and of course Daley's deal is front-loaded. He's supposed to make $4 million this year, and then the deal just back dives in the next 2 years. So I mean, his signing, it wasn't I expected. I'm not thrilled with it, but it's something I can live with. It's their other deals that they made, paying Luke Witkowski basically for quote unquote grit and toughness, which you do not need in the NHL these days. I don't know why the shills of beat writers are seemingly so obsessed that you do. It drives me nuts. But I'm just going to go ahead and say that he was only signed just because he and Danny DeKeyser were roommates at Western Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of smaller deals, and again, those people, that will look at those and say, why are you doing that? Well, of course, they've got probably assignments to Grand Rapids written all over them, and the AHL has no salary cap, so at this point, those deals don't fall on the big clubs' payroll, so to speak. But looking at their roster situation with the defense, I think that they definitely need to address it because they are not a good defensive hockey club. But they've been hamstrung with bad contracts. Danny DeKeyser's contract is a bad deal. Nicholas Cronwall, really not through a fault of his own, is a bad deal simply because his health has declined so much. And you've got Mike Green, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent and probably your biggest trade chip now heading into the season. So in the long term, it makes sense from that standpoint because they're going to need to have guys that play. But the same thing applies that we just talked about with the Tigers. I know what Trevor Daley does, and he's 34 years old. I don't need a 34-year-old defenseman. I want to see who we have and what they can do. Xavier Ouellette is pretty much the same guy as Trevor Daley when you look at the advanced metrics. Pretty much the same defenseman. And he's a lot cheaper and he's a lot younger. And there's no reason why they needed to sign Trevor Daley in the short term when you have all of the guys that they have now. I get why they would make the move because at some point somebody's going to be gone. Mike Green's going to be gone. And possibly other players as well. But it's still, you really want to see what they have. Plus, they have guys that play in Grand Rapids that probably could use a look. Joe Hicketts is one of them. And you got to be able to find out what these guys can do. And they're not going to be able to replicate in the AHL what they face in the NHL on a nightly basis. And I think that for them to, again, stifle the growth of the players that they have in the system is a mistake. And like I said, I'm in agreement with Frank. It makes sense on the surface, but I mean, there's just so many other options that they have, and it goes back to Ken Holland's unwillingness to basically rebuild this team from the ground up by continuing to sign veterans that will fill the void that they could fill with cheaper, younger alternatives, and maybe find the person that can get the job done for a lot less money. And they talk about finding these hidden gems in the draft and doing all these other things. You don't know if they're going to be hidden gems if you'll never play them. And I think that's one of the things that the double talk that comes from Ken Holland's mouth is they talk about guys that, who want to see what they can do. Well, they can't do it if they don't have an available roster spot. Because I don't care who you are. If you're a guy that has a great camp, but there's a guy ahead of you that just signed a new 3-year deal worth $9.5 million, he's going to play, not you. And it doesn't really matter how good you are, because the economics of the situation are going to dictate that you don't get that roster spot and that guy does. So I think that for the Red Wings, it makes them a little bit better, but I just don't think it's worth the effort for them to get better, because for this team overall to improve, they're going to need to go younger. They're going to need to find out who they have and take stock of what's available to them. And by signing Trevor Daley, they're just, again, kicking that can down the road and hoping they can put butts in the seats for probably 2 meaningless playoff games at Little Caesars Arena.
I still don't think it puts them as a playoff team because...
Oh, I don't think it does either. That's
I haven't... I'll come out with my playoff projections probably in September. But the thing is, the Eastern Conference, the Atlantic Division is a weak division, mind you. But the thing is, you got a really loaded Metropolitan Division, and I don't think you're going to be jumping any of those bottom teams there, because you look in the Atlantic and you've got a team. You got Montreal in there, who also just locked up Carey Price for 8 more years and made him the highest paid goaltender. I think it was 8 years, $84 million they're giving him. And that's a pretty hefty deal. Plus, you still got Toronto Maple Leafs who are on the rise, which they signed Patrick Marleau for 3 years. I kind of expected that. I think Marleau could actually be the piece that puts them over the top, at least in the Eastern Conference, because you have a veteran presence to kind of play with a lot of the younger guys, and plus Marleau doesn't have to be the man there. He can just kind of go and be like that calm voice in the locker room. So,
he's going to play some heavily sheltered minutes for the Leafs. I don't expect them to stick him with 20 minutes a game, but you're right. He's not expected to be the man. The Leafs are Austin Matthews' team, but Marleau's just brought in kind of some veteran experience, and plus he's played for Babcock at the Olympics before. Honestly, I think next year, if you want a sleeper team to come out of the East, keep an eye on Toronto. And plus, over in the Metro, you got Pittsburgh, Washington, Columbus. I don't think they're going anywhere. And then there's teams like Carolina who could sneak in. Philly could possibly sneak in. The only team I don't see doing anything out of the Metro is probably the Islanders or New Jersey. But you got 6 teams in that Metropolitan Division who you could say could end up being in the playoffs. So it's just the fact that the Wings are just in such a deep conference, and the other division, the way the playoffs set up, that it's 2 wild cards, and I think we could see a scenario where both wild cards come from the Metro again this year. So, and the other thing is the other teams ahead of them. There's not a lot of teams ahead of Detroit that are getting any worse. Tampa Bay did sign Dan Girardi and Chris Kunitz, but again, you have to look at the realistic situation is that Detroit was the second to worst team in the conference, the third to worst team in the conference, with 79 points. That means they've got to leapfrog another 13 teams to get to the top. Now, are they going to get to the top? No. Okay, so now you go to the wild card. They still have to get over 7 teams just to get into the wild card. Are they going to be better than those 7 teams?
No.
Probably not. You look at the teams that are in the division. Montreal is they're going to be there. Ottawa is going to be there. Boston is a little bit iffy. Toronto is going to get better. Tampa Bay, for all the things that they did have to weather last year without having Steven Stamkos, they were a point out of the playoffs. I mean, really the only team that probably didn't get any better in the expansion draft and first days of free agency was Florida. And so you look at Detroit, okay, maybe they get over Florida. That still puts them 6th in the division, where only 3 or maybe 4 teams get in. And you have to look at that and say, okay, is it really worth expending our resources to be the 6th team instead of the 7th team? Because I don't think Detroit's any better than the 5 teams above them in the Tampa Bay, Toronto, Boston, Iowa, Montreal group. They're not better than those teams. And if you're not going to be better than those teams, you're not making the playoffs. So why not just gear down, sign the guys that you're in your system, or sign your restricted free agents, bring guys up from the minors that could possibly give you a little bit of something in the lineup, and find out what you have. Take the stock of what you have. And I've always been a proponent of that. If you're not going to be in, you can still field a competitive team with a goal of making your team better in the long run. But that's not a Ken Holland philosophy. His philosophy is we're going to go for it all the time. And time again, they make decisions that are based on very unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, and hopefully this is the last time we've had to go through a July 1st with Ken Holland as the GM, because his contract, he's in the final year of his contract, and hopefully this organization is smart enough to realize they're going nowhere with him in charge, and he doesn't get re-signed. Because if he gets re-signed, then Little Caesars Arena is going to look like Phillips Arena when the Atlanta Thrashers were in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you're an owner. I don't care if you are Chris Ilitch and you're kind of taking that stand back role. If you're losing money, you're losing money. And for them to continue to try to push this agenda of we have to be competitive, we have to try to battle for everything we have and try to get into the playoffs. You don't owe the fans that. I know that that's what Ken Holland thinks, but you don't owe the fans anything because their long run of success that they had should be enough. But again, we come back to those spoiled fan bases with all the success of this has been pretty much since 2006 for the Tigers and really all the way back into the late 90s for Detroit. They keep thinking it's going to happen, and it just can't. The sports are not built now with the salary caps and the way that the rules are. You're not built for those types of long-term successes year after year. You have to be able to regress, bring in some new blood, make moves, and then make another run with that group. And yeah, there might be some holdovers, but it's all about getting bad before you get good. And that's how the teams and the leagues are structured now. And Detroit is one of the very few teams in that league that continues to have that philosophy that they need to succeed every year or it's a failure. I mean, not making the playoffs is a failure. It is. But if you're putting guys out there and letting them learn on the job to make your team better in the future, people can handle that. But again, they pander to the lowest common denominator, which is the goofballs and the idiots and the slappies that say, we got to make the playoffs because we got to keep that streak alive. Nobody cares about a 25-year playoff streak if you're getting bounced in the first round every year. It doesn't do you any good.
Especially if you're not nearly a cup contender, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And the thing is, using the case of Nashville is a poorly formed argument simply because Nashville is an 8 seed. I mean, they're head and shoulders above Detroit. And to make that comparison that you have to be able to get in to make some success, that's true. If you have a talented team that goes through some rocky stuff in the regular season and barely gets in, seeding-wise, but the Detroit Red Wings are not that team. They backed into the playoffs 2 years ago. They missed it this year. They really should have not been in the playoffs against Tampa Bay last year, but because Boston didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Detroit
all because Tuukka Rask had diarrhea for Jeff Lawson, Detroit Sports Rag. And people will say, oh, whatever. That's nothing. And they still got in. They had no business being there. And
it was proven by the way that they played against Tampa Bay. I mean, Tampa Bay completely outclassed them. And I don't need them to be in the playoffs.
And the Red Wings kept giving the puck away, and fans only being happy about their team getting into the playoffs. They're just arrogant, lazy, and just intolerable. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care that they're in the playoffs. I don't need them to be in the playoffs to be considered a success. Because if you look at the teams that have been in the playoffs this year, I mean, look at the Ottawa team. They barely scraped by. Toronto a couple years ago was terrible. I mean, you go through the playoffs, the teams that are at the top consistently, the Washingtons, the Pittsburghs, the Montreals, there's a reason. Whether it be a Carey Price or a Sidney Crosby or whoever, there's a reason. And Detroit has none of those players. So to think that you're going to compete with those types of teams when you get into the playoffs, that's a flawed argument as well, because you're not going to. You don't have that. You don't have that ability to compete with those teams on a night-in, night-out basis. They'll point to the record against the playoff teams from 2017 and say, well, we were 4-1 against Pittsburgh. Well, great. I can make stats up, too, that make me look better than I am. But the fact of the matter is that you had a team in Nashville that was an 8 seed in probably one of the better divisions in hockey, probably the second best division in hockey, behind the Metro in the Western Conference Central Division. Those 94 points are not the same 94 points in other divisions. They're just not. And to look at teams that have made it as an 8 seed and won the cup or got to the finals, you have to look at how good those teams were, what their teams were made up of. Those Los Angeles Kings teams, yeah, they didn't do great in the regular season, but they were great playoff teams because that's what their job was. They knew they had to get in, but it was for a different reason. It's because they were built for the playoffs. They had a good goaltender that could carry them. They had a solid defense, and they had some guys that could score. Detroit doesn't have all of those components. And for them to think that they're going to get in the playoffs and make some noise, it's a flawed argument, and it only tells me that they really don't know what's going on with the league. Because, I mean, look at Calgary. Calgary was the last team in the Western Conference, and they got blown out against Anaheim. I mean, do we need to do that again? Do we need to get the first round and get bounced again and say it was a success because they had a chance? I mean, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And that's where this Trevor Daley signing is pointing to is all we have to do is get in. We want to make ourselves better. Well, great, but when you don't make the playoffs again, because they're probably not going to make the playoffs, now where does that leave you? Now you have a guy that's 34 years old making $3.5 million a year on a 3-year contract, and that's what you're trying to peddle to the fan base.
Yeah. And to your point, Buck, I mean, those 8C teams that got in, they'll point to Nashville and say, oh, well, yeah, well, the Nashville Predators. You have to look at a team and how they're built. Nashville's blue line had P.K. Subban, Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, and Matthias Ekholm. The Red Wings, even now with Trevor Daley, don't have anybody that pisses in the same toilet as those guys. And the Kings from 2012. That team, their blue line, you had Drew Doughty on their blue line, Jonathan Quick in net, plus you had Jeff Carter up front, as one of your scorers, and they'll leave Billy help. They'll try and even point to Edmonton in 2006. Edmonton at that time had Chris Pronger on their blue line. One of the
who was actually, he was pre-injury, Chris Pronger, who was very good.
Yeah, and the guy's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So, I mean, they try and point to all those past teams, but you have to look at who they had and how they were able to play the game. And you look at who the Red Wings have, and nobody is comparable to that. And that's just something that people try and use towards me every time, and it pisses me off.
Well, I would laugh at the person that tried to point to the Edmonton Oilers, because if they forgot, you can remind them that the Edmonton Oilers team beat the President's Trophy Detroit Red Wings in the first round. So anybody that wants to point to that is really disarming their own argument, because that Red Wings team was a 124-point team going into the playoffs and got bounced by Edmonton. So it doesn't matter how good you are. Yeah, great. They bounced the first seed, but that first seed was your team. So which one is it? Is it going to be you got to be dominant, or is it you just got to get in?
You got to be dominant. You can't just get in.
Right. I mean, and like Frank said and I said, you have to look at how teams are structured. And Nashville's defense, 1 through 6, was better than anything Detroit has right now.
Right.
And that's something that you can point to. The LA Kings were way better top to bottom in 2012 than the Detroit Red Wings were. So those points are not really valid. It doesn't matter how many points they had in the regular season, they got in, but those teams were significantly better. And that's what you have to look for. You have to look for teams that are significantly better. And right now the Detroit Red Wings are not, and they keep making signings and decisions like they will be.
Absolutely. By the way, whoever has their cell phone vibrator, please turn it off while we're on the air. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. But thanks. Just a reminder. But they also trade a conditional draft pick to the Calgary Flames for Thomas McCollum, who is apparently going to rejoin with the Grand Rapids Griffins, because there's still Peter Mrazek and Jimmy Howard, of course. They're not, as far as I'm concerned, they're going nowhere as of right now.
Yeah, and plus it'll probably just be Coro and now McCollum because Jake Patterson's gone. You know, he spent a lot of time at Toledo. Eddie Pasquale is now gone. So essentially, all you had left was
Patterson and Lurg are all gone too.
Lurg's gone, and then all you had left in the organization was Cal Heater, and he's only I think he's pretty much stuck in Toledo. But the thing is, the Wings have also had some goalies they've drafted in recent years. That one dude from Switzerland, I cannot pronounce his last name without butchering it to death. I think it was Jorn van Potelberg. Sorry if I'm butchering that badly. They drafted a couple of years ago. And then I believe it was the 4th round. And then I think also they drafted Keith Petroluzzi in the 3rd round this year, which was said to be their best pick in the NHL draft. So those will probably be guys that you'll see in a couple of years. Some of them they just keep in juniors for so long, but once you sign them to their entry-level deals, those will probably just be in Grand Rapids or Toledo.
Yeah, that's true. That's a no-brainer. So this is just an update on the Red Wings' small sample size trade market update. Watch. So that's hockey, and that's the Red Wings. So we're going to transition to basketball and the Pistons here.
Left sideline 3, and he answers.
Let's go in chronological order. They trade shooting guard Darrun Hilliard to the Houston Rockets for cash considerations, and the Rockets therefore get Chris Paul in a trade for 7 players from the LA Clippers. And then the Brooklyn Nets show interest in shooting guard KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and the Wizards' Otto Potter. And now, just yesterday, the Pistons have signed point guard Langston Galloway to a 3-year, $21 million deal.
I love it.
And
hold on money.
Yeah, Langston Galloway, a very big 3-point shooter, 47.5% with the Sacramento Kings in just 19 games since he was traded to the Kings and he played just 19 games as the season came down to the home stretch. And also Jasper Apollonia, a former Detroit Sports Rag podcast co-host alongside with Jeff Moss, wrote an article of his own headlining Pistons. Just a minute here. Wait a second. Oh, there we go. Get back here. There we go.
For Piston powered
Yep.
there, yeah.
Yeah, piston powered. Yeah, 36.3% career 3-point shooter. I think that's what I remember. Is that right? Right, Frankie? Can you pull that up again?
I'm pulling it up right now.
Well, and the thing is, with Langston Galloway, he's bounced around. He's a point guard by designation, but he really is a little bit of an undersized two. And for him, I think that he compares as far as ability-wise with what KCP brought to the table. He's a long-distance shooter. He's been praised for his defense. And I think that for them to go after Galloway tells me that, number one, they may be ready to have KCP basically walk away for nothing. Because right now, as it stands, they can't resign him to a supermax or a team max deal because they would be over that hard cap. So they'd have to make a corresponding move beneath that hard cap. And that said, with KCP and other things that are revolving around the Pistons lineup, it's going to be kind of hard for me to say that they would need to bring KCP back at this point simply because of the economics. You give him a max team deal, and then you're going to have 3 max players on your roster. And for a team that's not making the playoffs, that's almost certain death because you're going to be in cap hell because you're not able to get a high lottery pick if you're that high in the standings. So if you're 8, 9, 10 seed, you're not getting a high lottery pick probably. And if you don't resign KCP, you get nothing for him. So I think that for the Pistons to sign Galloway, I like the move. I think he's an underrated player that has bounced around some bad teams, and I think that they can utilize him a little bit more. But that said, they're going to have to get some dead weight off their roster too. And I really wish they could get rid of Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond, who brought nothing to the table statistically.
Especially with Drummond's missed free throws.
Right.
You
look at the advanced stats when it comes to Drummond and Jackson being on the floor versus when they're not. There's a discernible difference upward when those guys aren't on the floor. So it's not something that they need. They don't need Andre Drummond. They don't need Reggie Jackson. They have a guy who's a combo guard now. And if they can move those guys, it gives you more than enough room to get KCP under the cap and allows you a little bit more flexibility. I don't see the Pistons as a big playoff threat next year, but that Eastern Conference is so top-heavy that that's one of the situations that if you say you're getting in, that is a success. And that's because, outside of Cleveland and Boston and maybe Washington, it's pretty much a crapshoot. Any of those teams that go in under that 4 to 8 spot, those could be any order at any time. And I think that for the teams that are above the Pistons right now, I think their roster checks out favorably with them. So to sign Galloway and perhaps make some other moves, it would make sense. But right now, KCP is the biggest X factor in that because they'd like him to come back. They would like to sign him, but they're not going to pay a luxury tax to be a non-playoff team. And Tom Gores has specifically said that he really doesn't enjoy paying the luxury tax, and I don't blame him because if you're not going to make the playoffs, that's just money down the toilet.
Yeah, and real quick, Galloway's 3-point percentage in his career is 36.6%. That's higher than any of the current Pistons players. It's another sign of Van Gundy's desire to upgrade his team's shooting and defense. Says he's third. I think last season, and this is from Hardwood Paroxysm, Galloway was 39% from three-point land. Was in the 97th percentile on synergy defense, which whatever that is. And defensive rating was better with him on court in both New Orleans and Sacramento. So, and then Jasper mentions by signing Galloway this year and Ish Smith to affordable contracts instead of going for bigger names, SVG has solidified his backup guard situation for a combined $13 million a year. It's actually not bad. It says Jasper goes on to say that that's just slightly over 13% of the salary cap and would not only represent good value for Detroit, but also gives them more flexibility in regards to KCP's ongoing restricted free agency. The Pistons will most likely match any offer for him, but they'll also relish having as many options at their disposal as possible if they want.
And the other thing, to that point on that, one of the things I saw bandied about with the drafting of Luke Kennard, who's probably going to be on that opening night roster. You look at a guy like John Lewis making $10 million a year. I mean, I'm sure that some team would be able to afford that and basically trade him away for nothing to get that extra room to sign KCP's offer sheet wherever he gets it from. And so if you're looking for a guy to trade, I mean, John Lewis doesn't really bring anything spectacular or remarkable to the table. So if you can find a team that's looking for somebody to fill a role, that'd be the guy that I would try to shop, because that $10 million cap number is pretty outrageous for a guy who is basically a midline contributor on a non-playoff team.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they've got to move Lure, and I'm really not sure who else you'd end up moving. Hang outside of that, besides Kennard's been pretty solid in summer league action.
I want to point out, I found an article just recently from Piston Powered by Braden Shackelford headlining the Detroit Pistons are committed to keeping Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
Are you out of your mind?
Stupid fool. I mean, it's Rod.
They should be.
They should be. Rod Beard tweeted, Pistons Stan Van Gundy says keeping the president, not the GM, but the president, Stan Van Gundy, and head coach, says keeping KCP is a priority in free agency. They've extended a qualifying offer already about $5 million. So, Buck, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it makes sense to obviously to keep him
closer.
You don't want to lose him, but I think that the way that this roster is constructed, that they're going to have to make somebody move. And looking at their current roster right now, Aaron Baines is off the roster. Darrun Hilliard got traded. So they have room on the active roster to add him. It's not like they have to get rid of somebody for space just because. It's all about the economics of it. So you still have Stanley Johnson at a forward spot that they're trying to see what they've got with him. And Henry Allenson, who was their first-round draft pick last year, they want to work him into the rotation, obviously, and see what they've got with him and bring him along. So, I mean, there's not a lot of options for the Pistons at this point other than to sign any offer sheet that KCP were to receive. But then they're going to have to make a corresponding move. They really don't want to pay that luxury tax, and they shouldn't, simply because if you're the 10 or 11 seed, you can't be paying the luxury tax. I mean, it's just, you can't be doing it. And I think that with the way that they've got their roster now, they've pretty much solidified the backcourt. Their front line is a little weak, but in the East, there's not a lot of teams that have great front lines. And a Stan Van Gundy team is always built on defense and outside shooting. And so to get rid of somebody, on that roster, you're probably looking at somebody from the front line like a Lure, and he really probably makes the most sense. And, if they can just make one more move and do that, I think they're all set. At this point, it just really bears down to the numbers and what they can get KCP for, or who offers him the offer sheet and what they have to match in terms of that.
Mm-hmm. So, thank God Aaron Baines is off the roster. Darrun Hilliard, small sample size trade for cash considerations. Still, Pistons. They're trying to keep KCP. They signed Langston Galloway, a very valuable point guard who has better 3-point shooting percentage than KCP and Ish Smith. So that covers all bases on the Pistons. So we transition to pro football and the Detroit Lions.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Camp is less than a month away for them, and
preseason. Yep.
I mean, it's coming up fast, and it'll be a welcome respite from the Tigers.
It's still actually a little bit more than a month before the preseason starts. I think.
Right. Yeah, the camp's open. I think the last week of July should be. I don't know exactly what the date for the Lions, but and again, we talked about this on the Talk Shoe podcast. This is kind of the dead period for the NFL. But if you're looking at the Lions roster, they're still entertaining free agents and trying to bulk up that roster, as well as the specter of the Matthew Stafford extension hanging over them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably your biggest topic is at some point they're going to have to figure out what's going to happen with Matthew Stafford. Because if they move on and make him the highest paid quarterback in the league, which his contract, it would be the biggest contract for a quarterback, because most people are speculating that he'd be north of $25 million per year. That's a big chunk of your salary cap. And,
oh boy.
You look at it from a perspective of, is he worth it? Maybe, maybe not. But then you look at the rest of the team and what you have left to surround him. Quarterback is by far your most important position in the National Football League. If you don't have a good quarterback, you're probably not going very far.
Like Matthew Stafford.
That said, but that said, do you tie up a good chunk of your salary cap with one guy for somebody that hasn't won a playoff game yet? Now, I know some of those factors are out of his control, but the fact remains that he has not won a playoff game while the Lions quarterback. And you have to look at the options that they're going to have coming down the road in free agency next year. People aren't giving away good quarterbacks, and there's not really a lot of teams that are going to be losing free agency quarterbacks. So I think that at the end of the day, that Bob Quinn's probably going to have to swallow that poison pill and make that extension, and then it's going to get kind of iffy because they're going to have to make some moves and find some guys to move around and restructure some deals so they can get in under that cap and give themselves some room to be a competitive team. And that's going to be really, I think, more than the team's moves that they are making. That's going to be what people are focused on as camp goes through and even into the regular season. It's not going to be what they're doing on the field. It's going to be, is Matt Stafford going to be the Lions quarterback in 2018?
And I think it would be stupid if they don't re-sign him because, for one, you've got Brad Kaya, who you drafted, and he's not ready to take over the starting job yet.
Probably will sign him to the practice squad.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a case where Bob Quinn's got to pay the piper here, and get him to stick around because he's basically he's the best option you have. I mean, Washington might let Kirk Cousins walk, but has he won a playoff game? No. So, I mean, you're basically making a lateral move, if not a backwards move there. So, this is a situation where Stafford's you have to re-sign him. No excuses. And you got to pay him whatever.
Well, you kind of do. I mean, looking at the free agency outlook next year, these are the quarterbacks that are at the top of the list. Drew Brees, who will be 39, Kirk Cousins, and Sam Bradford. Those are your top quarterbacks heading into free agency next year after Matthew Stafford. After that, it's a pretty dark and really depressing list of quarterbacks. I think the worst thing that happens is Detroit doesn't come to an agreement on an extension with him, and they franchise tag him. It's not what they want to do, but it may be something that they have to do, because if they can't come to an agreement on an extension, maybe they franchise him for next year and see if they can work out something then. And teams do that all the time, where they use the franchise tag to lower the overall value of the next contract that player is getting. And that might be something that Bob Quinn does. And I would think that if he doesn't make a move on the extension, that's probably where they're headed, is Matthew Stafford getting a franchise tag, which will place him in the top 5 of quarterbacks anyway, but only on a 1-year deal. And then maybe they look at what they've got, because Matthew Stafford will be 30 heading into next season. And 30 is that magic age for football players, regardless of position, where you start looking at decline and regression rates. And again, there's not a lot of options below Matthew Stafford. I mean, Sam Bradford is not in the same category as Matthew Stafford. Kirk Cousins, I don't think, is in the same category. Drew Brees is just old. So, Matthew Stafford's probably their best option. It's just going to depend on how they decide to play that out, not only in the public eye, but also in private conversation with Matthew Stafford, and seeing if they can come to an agreement. Because to make him a $25 million quarterback with no playoff wins under his belt is a really tough pill to swallow for any organization. And for the Lions, with a lot of other needs, it's going to be a tough decision. But I think that's going to be the main point for a lot of players, for a lot of people, about what they're doing on the field, as much as is he going to be our quarterback next year. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that he is going to be their quarterback. It's just going to depend if he's got a long-term extension or if he's got a franchise tag, and see what they can do and kick that can down another year.
Speaking of the roster, running back Matt Asiata, reportedly according to thescore.com, is not a lock for the final 53-man roster spot. He will battle for it with reserve Mike James, because the top 4 appear to be Amir Abdullah, Theo Riddick, Zach Zenner, and Dwayne Washington, whom Ed Smith wants cut, but I think the low ball would be Mike James, because Matt Asiata will definitely prove a lot better than Mike James, of course. That's a no-brainer on that one.
Well, and the other thing...
Closer. Buck, are you still there? Frank, any thoughts?
I think Asiata remains on the roster just because he's been productive in his career as a backup with Minnesota. So I don't think he loses out a spot to somebody like Mike James, who hasn't really done squat in the league.
No, of course not. Looks like we lost Buck Geno here. I'm going to try to get him back here.
Sorry about that, guys. Apparently my Wi-Fi dinged out, so I'll be back. I'll be using my phone's data. Not a big deal.
That's fine.
With that said, it's about, my point was, it's not about what you can do in your position. It's about what you can do on special teams and other things to help the team.
Yeah, like returning punts and returning kicks.
Right. I mean, if you're the 4th running back, you got to be doing something else.
Or the 5th running back.
Sidelines all game. Right. So you're going to have to do something else. And I think that's where Matt Asiata will probably come in with the competition against Washington, is they both have experience returning kicks. So that's, I think, where Matt Asiata can get in, because it's not going to be about how many yards he gains in the preseason from running the football. It's going to be about what can he do on special teams and other places to help us, so that if something does happen on the roster, he's available. But he's got to be able to do the other things, and I just don't know if Washington has enough diversity in his game, other than returning kicks, to make himself a remarkable candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other update I wanted to pass along to our listeners here, former NFL linebacker and lastly with the Baltimore Ravens, Zach Orr, not to be confused with NHL Boston Bruins great Bobby Orr. Zach Orr visited the Lions earlier the past week, and he's thinking about coming back from retirement to the NFL. He visited the Lions, and that's the last we heard. And that's been it.
Yeah, I've heard that since he's visited the Lions, there have been several more NFL teams that have expressed interest in signing him.
There you go.
And the Colts were one of them. So I mean, I don't know if if teams are just realizing, wait a minute, this guy might be able to bring something to the table, or if he sees the Lions are going after, have decided to bring him in, why don't we give him a call too? I mean, it's something that's going to be interesting to see in the next couple of days, and where he does end up signing. I guess I'm not sure if they've said anything about how his physical went, but if there's a lot of teams calling on him, I guess everything went well there.
Well, I think that if he's able to play football, there'll be more than just the Lions interested in him. And I think that just that first visit probably alerted some teams to his availability. There's not much in the NFL that gets past even the worst of front offices. And if he's making a visit to the Detroit Lions, like you said, Frank, they're probably getting on the horn with his agent and saying, hey, I mean, if he wants to come play for us, we'll be more than happy to entertain some offers for him too. We just need to make sure that he's physically ready to go. And that's really the biggest key is, can he pass a physical, and will he be able to be cleared to play? Because the reason that he retired.
Yeah. You got to be 100%. That's the key. And is he 100%? That's the question. We'll find out. I lost Geno again here. But you got, like I just pointed out, you got to be 100%. That's the question. Is he 100%? We'll have to find out in due time.
Well, and that's something that just is going to have to play out. I mean, he's met with other teams. The Colts and the Jets are two that he has met with in the past couple of days. So, again, I mean, it just boils down to, can he pass a physical? Can he, I shouldn't say guarantee, but can he assure the team that he's going to sign with that he's going to be ready to play come the first week of the season? And, I mean, like I said, I think the one thing that people are kind of missing on this, regardless of where he signs, is if I'm the Ravens, I'm going to try to get some compensation, because he retired in January. It's not like he retired 2 years ago and then just decided to pick up the phone again and start playing. He was on an active roster last year. And so I think that for Zach Orr, not only is there going to be some short-term questions, but also that long-term question is, are the Ravens going to get compensation from him simply because of the injury retirement situation? And if so, are they going to get something from the team that signs him in the terms of compensation? So the Lions have to be careful of that, and so does every other team in the league, because if they're signing him, they're going to have to be prepared to give up something. It may not be much. It's probably be a conditional draft pick, but it's still something that you have to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's going to be nothing more than possibly late round pick.
No, I mean, and again, I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to be losing a first round pick because of it, but if I'm the Ravens, I'm not going to be necessarily happy with a guy that retired due to injury reasons suiting up for another team in the fall with nothing for me to show for it.
In particular, no. Because otherwise, then Ravens fans, for example, will be booing you when anytime you return to Baltimore, for example, and play there. When you play for the Lions, for example.
Which, oddly enough, the Lions will be playing in Baltimore this season.
Since they have never won in Baltimore when they were named the Ravens, even in a preseason game.
I think they did win.
Oh yeah, it just came back to me. Yes, they did win in Baltimore once in a preseason game, but just not in the regular season. That's right. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, it's quite unbelievable that they would do that in any preseason or regular season game or whatever. But that's Lions. We'll transition to college football now. The Michigan Wolverines.
Touchdown, Michigan!
Only one big update on their wide receiver Grant Perry, who was earlier suspended 2 games. He pled guilty to a felony count of resisting an officer, but the important thing is he avoided the sexual assault conviction. And was it good or bad that he avoided it, particularly?
Well,
I mean, it's probably good for him.
For him, at least,
good for him, though. But there's going to be people that look at it and say that, is this how Washtenaw County prosecution wants to play ball in the court system? Because there are other places where you won't get a plea bargain. Because I can remember when I took a political science class with a then circuit court judge at Monroe County Community College, and we were learning about plea bargains during a lecture. He said places like Oakland County at that time, they probably do this now, that they don't plea bargain. You're going to go to trial, and if you get convicted, you're in big trouble. So, I mean, I'm not really sure what happened between Perry's lawyers and the Washtenaw County prosecutor, but I guess that there was not enough. I guess there wasn't really enough evidence for a slam dunk case. So I guess really all they could nail him on was just R&O, which is it's actually a 2-year high misdemeanor in the state of Michigan. So I guess they said, you know what, we'll get him to plead to. We'll get a deal, get him to plead to this, so that way we can get him on something rather than risk going to trial, and then he ends up getting off with nothing.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the court case now, one thing to note, and it's a little bit noteworthy in itself that he was actually tried in Ingham County, which has its own problems with other football players in that court system. But you're right. I mean, are you going to go to trial with a lot of hearsay and third-person testimony on a fourth-degree CSC case? Or are you just going to try to get him on the things that you know of, which is, like you said, resisting arrest, and put him on probation since he's a first-time offender? And I think if you kind of delve into all of this, that they didn't have enough to go to a jury with the fourth-degree CSC case, and decided that the lesser of two evils was to get him on something that they know, which was resisting arrest, because they're going to have testimony from the police officers from East Lansing that said he tried to do that. So it made sense for him to plead guilty to that and avoid any jury trial and bring up any evidence of that night that could have led to speculation of what exactly occurred, and just trying to get this done. And I think under the advisement of his team of lawyers, Grant Perry probably did the right thing. And I think that he's probably served his time as far as in the court of public opinion. I mean, if you're Michigan, he didn't play. I don't think he played the last 2 games or the bowl game, if I remember correctly. So he served a suspension, and he now will move forward with his career. He's done his time, so to speak, and I think that now that that's passed, for the Michigan Wolverines, I think he's pretty much in the clear. I would say this, though, if anything else were to come up, whether it be a prior incident or something that he does in the future, I don't think that Jim Harbaugh would have any choice but to dismiss him from the team, simply because, as we've learned with other teams, especially Michigan State, you can't ignore patterns of these type of things, and you really have to nip them in the bud. So I would think that Grant Perry probably is on his second and last chance as far as is concerned with running in with the law.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there, because Harbaugh's got to send him a message saying, hey, I don't care that you got a plea deal and got off on something. You pull any more stupid shit like this, your ass is out the door. This ain't gonna be tolerated. Because I've seen it in other programs too, where something happens where player will only miss like a game against some dumpster fire team. But if it's a big game, nope, they're gonna still be out there, or maybe just sit for a series just to say, oh, we punished him for it. I mean, that's why I like the coaches in this state, like D'Antonio and Harbaugh. Even though I'm a Michigan State fan, I'll respect Harbaugh for saying, I'm not going to tolerate any of this garbage of people getting in trouble with the law. It means coaches have to be willing to rule with an iron fist here and say, hey, these are the guidelines, and if you don't live by them, you're going to pay the consequences up to getting shown the door.
Well, and with the climate, college football wise, and not only in just college football, but in the state of Michigan right now, I just don't think there's any room for Grant Perry or pretty much anybody else, especially when it comes to crimes of the sexual nature. I just don't think there's any room for them to make any sort of deals or any sort of leniency. I think they just have to move forward, and just like you said with Mark D'Antonio and everybody else, you have to let the process take place. You can't just automatically suspend somebody without any evidence or anything that would allow the player to just tell his side of the story. But at the same time, if you have something come up and it is found that they are guilty of it, there's just no room for it. And I think that Harbaugh has probably told Grant Perry as much. And I'm sure that the rest of the team has heard that message as well. And hopefully throughout the season that they don't have any more of these incidents.
So, as Ed Smith would say, please, please, please stay out of trouble. But yeah, those are the team rules for the Michigan Wolverines. If you're going to continue to get in trouble, then you just don't belong on this team anymore, period. You shouldn't even be playing college football for any other school at all, period.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is with these types of things, the Corleys and the Kings of the world, it's going to be hard for them to find another spot once everything is completed, and whether they are found guilty or not. I mean, let's say they're able to play for a team. If I'm a coach, do I really want to have to deal with that when I have other players that I can just go to, regardless of the person's talent, and say, hey, this guy doesn't get in trouble. He's a good player. He's a good person. When you have those types of things on your record, it's really tough for somebody else to overlook that and say, well, we're going to give it another shot, because those type of things aren't a one-time deal. And like I said, if Grant Perry gets on the up and up, good for him. If he has another incident, no problem with him being kicked off the team. Don't wait for it. Just go ahead and do it, because Jim Harbaugh doesn't need that aggravation. And the person that's really taking advantage of his status or his station as a college football player, they don't deserve it.
Of course not. So, a little Michigan Wolverines men's basketball update.
For three, yes, sir.
They have recruited 2018 four-star forward Brandon Johns. So, there's your update on that. So that's all the material we've covered. Now we have this new segment called What's Your Grade? I have a list of 3 occurrences over the past week, and I want each of you to give a grade. We may have different grades, but we might have the same too. But here's the first one. Number 1, Victor Martinez's return from his irregular heartbeat.
I'll go first. D-. The only reason he doesn't get an F is because we want somebody to be healthy. We don't wish any ill will on anybody for that type of thing, and I'm glad that he's healthy and able to return. That said, I mean, he went 0 for today. I mean, he went 0 for 5, and regardless of where he's sitting in the lineup right now, he's just not contributing much for what he's being paid. So I'm glad that he's healthy enough to return, but he's just not doing the job.
Yeah, he's retired.
I'm in the same boat with Buck there. I'm giving him a D-. I mean, granted, I'm happy that his issue got resolved. He's healthy because he is but I think he does need to consider hanging it up because he's also a husband and father, and I think he needs to spend more time with his family, and because I don't want him to have another health scare like this where it could end up causing him more problems. We don't want that to happen, but again, since he's returned, he hasn't really done anything.
Right, and all things considered and agreed, I have to give that a D- as well. Not to mention that when he returned, the Tigers got pounded by the Royals 8-2 on Wednesday night, and that's just like an example of like the tip of the iceberg right there. In addition to today's over performance, like Buck Geno pointed out. Total it up, you get nothingness, period, offensively from an old, washed-up, injury-prone designated hitter. That's something any organization in Major League Baseball never needs. If I were to give that another grade, I'd call that almost incomplete. So, number 2, the Red Wings signing Trevor Daley. Frank, I'll let you go first.
I mean, granted, it wasn't for a bad. It was for 1 year longer than I wanted, and it was for slightly over more the amount of money I wanted. So I mean, I'm not gonna give it an I'm not gonna give it an F or a D because I think if you're being too nitpicky. But still, it wasn't really something that they absolutely had to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a C-. But that's barely teetering on the edge of a D+. But I'm gonna give it a C- just because I think Daley is gonna be better than pretty much anything any of their other defensemen they put out there, and I do realize that they could have handed him a deal. They could have handed him Kevin Shattenkirk money and made things a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I kind of vacillated a little bit between the lower grades and kind of your grades, in the mid-tier. I would give it a straight C, simply because he is an improvement. But to your point, I mean, it's kind of like buying 10 things at the store instead of one. You've already got the defenseman that you already need on the roster. I don't think he adds a lot. The term and the money that he's getting, I'm not necessarily displeased with it. I don't think he should have gone 3 years, but that's what they did. But at the same time, there's guys on the team that have worse contracts. So the low bar that Ken Holland has set for his free agency signings, I'd have to agree with Frank. I think C- or a straight C is probably where that signing rests.
Well, here's what I pointed out earlier: 5 goals, 14 assists last season in the regular season, the playoff with the Penguins in the playoffs. 1 goal and 4 assists. Not very contributive. Defensively, he might be good on the penalty kill or just at his own blue line in front of the net. I don't even know. But there's no other analysis that I can come up with. I'll have to follow suit on this one and give it a C-. And then last but not least, number 3, the Pistons signing Langston Galloway. Buck, I'll let you go first.
Well, we've talked about it a lot in the show. It's something the Pistons need. He's a good defender. Has a better outside shot, at least percentage-wise, than anybody on the active roster. And he came with a relatively low price tag. So for me, I'm going to give this one a B. It's something that they did need. They did improve their backcourt by handing Ish Smith another deal and signing Galloway. And for what they were able to pay him, I know that they're a little bit tough. The only reason I can't give it higher than a B is because we don't know what's going to happen with KCP. And if they were able to get KCP under that cap, or if we were able to make it work for him and get him in there, they could move that grade up a little bit. But I think it's a solid signing. There wasn't a lot to pick from if you're the Pistons in free agency. They obviously weren't going to be the big dogs in that race for any of the big names. But Langston Galloway is one of those signings that I think could pay dividends. And if it doesn't work out, he's got a movable contract. And I think that with Galloway's history of being bounced around already in this league, if it somehow doesn't work out for the Pistons, he could probably go to another team, and they wouldn't be too sad about taking him on that low salary. So I'm going to give that one a B.
Same for me as well. Pretty much for the same reasons that Buck said. I mean, they got out a really solid guard to add to their rotation, good defender. They're better three-point shooter than anybody on their roster, for that matter. And they didn't give him a bad deal. I mean, 3 years is $7 million per year. And like I said, his deal this year and the deal that they signed Ish Smith to last year, that's combined $13 million for 2 backup guards, which that's actually not too bad in today's NBA. I mean, you didn't hand out a lot of money. You didn't give him $10 million a year or anything like that. But, I mean, also, how's it going to affect how you re-sign Davis Pope or not? So that's why I'm giving it a B.
Well, all I was focusing on was, quite honestly, his 3-point, not only his 3-point shooting, but how good he is defensively. While the numbers don't jump off the page, Galloway's only is 47.5% in those contests, 19 games with the Kings. Also, an athletic option on the defensive side who can stay in front of ball handlers. He can go, meaning he can go man to man, like all the time, on opposing shooters, on opposing attackers in his own territory. So I'd have to give that at least a mid-range B, maybe a B+, but no further. But this is just to add on to what each of you had pointed out. So that concludes this new segment, this new and first ever installment of this new segment called What's Your Grade? And to all the audience out there, give your grades too. Victor Martinez's return from his irregular heartbeat, the Red Wings signing Trevor Daley, and the Pistons signing Langston Galloway. Leave a comment with those grades in that comment bank below this episode for each of those occurrences. So, with that said, that is episode 271 of the Michigan Sports Truth Week in Review edition on Spreaker. Frank Vajcner and Buck Geno filling in for Ed Smith alongside myself, Taylor Phillips. Ed Smith out due to private personal reasons. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because I want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is in search of local advertising sponsors around the state, even in the Upper Peninsula. And if anyone has a business that's interested in sponsoring this program, you can follow Sports Radio Detroit on Twitter at Sports Radio DET, at Sports Radio Det, and send them a direct message or email them at Sports Radio Detroit in the contact section, or email its owner, Roger Castillo at Rogcast81 at gmail.com. Also, like their Facebook page and join their Facebook group. And finally, find their podcasts available on iTunes and Podbean. Frank and Buck, thanks so much for chipping in for Ed Smith, who had other business to take care of. Hopefully, he'll come back soon at some point. But let's keep chipping in just in case.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Ed, if you are listening to this, hope all is well with you, man, and we hope to have you back soon.
That's right.
Definitely. So, I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Frank Vajcner at Frank_Vajcner, VAJCNER, and Buck Geno at Buck Geno, III in Roman numerals. And like the Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join its Facebook group. We'll talk to you next week on episode 272. Thanks very much for listening. TTFN, ta-ta for now.
Bon appetit.